Thanks, everybody, for following along through Chapter 6. I was thinking that it could be a good use of time just to quickly give my impressions of the data storage and operations chapter. So I'm going to do that, and then we can do an opportunity for you guys to talk about your perceptions of the chapter, kind of things that you're finding to be interesting, how you find this playing out in your own work, also questions that you have. So there's 14 chapters of the data management body of knowledge that are tested on the fundamentals exam. Data storage is chapter 6, as we know, and it's only 6% of the exam. So it's kind of in the middle. It's not one of the more heavily weighted chapters, and it's not one of the chapters weighted at only 2%. It's just sort of floating there in the middle. The point of this is to maintain data integrity and availability throughout the operational life cycle. So we've talked a bit about the life cycle before. If you haven't seen this yet, it's covered in chapter 1. This is the data management chapter. And the data life cycle is everything from create/obtain data through store and then reporting on and using. And also important to note that some of your data you'll purge from your storage and operations process. We just don't want to collect and retain absolutely everything. That's for regulatory and compliance purposes, as well as the data privacy of user subjects, especially now since 2018 that GDPR has been in effect. Something else to think about as you're considering your data storage. Are we storing the data in such a way that it's easy to query and archive as needed? That's it, really. I don't want to get into too much detail here. I want to give time for other people to share their thoughts and perceptions of the chapter and to ask any questions that they may have.
So this is more of an observation. It was very interesting to me as they were describing organizations that separate their different types of DBAs. I've always worked at smaller organizations where we didn't even have a DBA, so I ended up being the DBA. And now I work at an organization that actually has 2 real DBAs, but they wear all the hats. They don't do production separated from development and procedural and all that stuff. So I'd be interested to hear if anyone else has worked at a place where there is such a definition or division between DBA responsibilities.
And just for folks who maybe didn't get to that part in the chapter, can you define DBA?
So DBA is the database administrator. They're the ones that are responsible for doing a lot of the technical work for setting up the databases, getting the definitions and turning it into an actual database that people are going to be using. And the chapter was talking about the different roles that they play. A production database administrator might support the production databases and actually be in the production area of the company. And a development DBA might be in a different place where they're developing the applications. So it was very highly specified what they would be doing.
Bill, what kind of data are you seeing being administrated by these kind of DBAs? Is it internal data for reporting and data science, or is it like production data in the sense of like it's customer data, like it's something that's being served up as a product to the customers?
It is the data that we own or manage on behalf of our clients. We're in healthcare insurance, so we store membership data, billing data. We don't do claim data. So basically it's all the customer data and their demographic information and financial information that we're storing and maintaining, plus all the metadata around that, the reports that we run for them and things like that.
So security and reliability are probably top of mind when you guys are setting up your databases.
Yes. Yeah, we have to be HIPAA compliant. We've done a high trust certification. So we have a lot of rules and regulations governing how we manage our data.
How does having a sandbox environment factor into all that? Is that a chance for you to experiment with new layouts of your database without having to do so much of that work? Basically, how does governing and administrating sandbox environment differ in your organization from what you do in production?
That was another thing that was interesting because they listed so many different environments. We basically have 3 environments. We have QA, which serves as our development environment as well. We have a UAT environment, which is kind of a pre-production where we put it so that our clients and end users can access it before it gets released into production. And then we have our production environment. If we needed a sandbox environment, we would spin up a separate, what we call a staging environment, which is a duplication of production. The difference between our UAT pre-production environment and production is that the UAT environment won't have any production data in it. So it won't have any live member data. But a staging environment that we use may have live data. It's a copy of our production environment so that we can actually test the processes. I have to do that for financial reporting because we don't have good, reliable financial data in our test environments. So another aspect of working at a smaller company is you don't have such formalized division of the environments for databases.
That is still a pretty good setup, though.
Yeah.
Well, and what I was driving at, so my wife works at Duns and Bradstreet, and data directly is their product.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding that that's such a different approach, and that's handled in such a different way from, I think, a lot of data analysts who are working with internal data that is often messy, unmanaged, just in whatever environment is available. Because it doesn't have the same security and reliability concerns. Customers aren't looking at it. It's purely internal. So I think the implementation of these environments matters to the kind of data that your organization stores and uses and what they need it for.
Yeah, I think Dun & Bradstreet has to be the industry leader or among the industry leaders in terms of data quality. They talked about the data supply chain at their organization, which was a really cool way to think about data being processed across the organization and how it's the raw input into their products.
Yeah,
it is their product.
Yeah, right. So that's like the highest level.
Yeah, I think in terms of best practices,
Yes.
they're a good one to look to. So it's very cool. This has been really enlightening. We can kick it over to Fleur if you have comments that you'd like to add.
Yes, just maybe a question to make sure that I understand well. It says that the DBA should use a controlled, documented, auditable process for moving application to production, a database. So that would be the role of the data governance council or the data steward. I mean, everything around more the governance to make sure that the DBA has actually written a document where it says how it does all that process. That's how we would link the two.
I work as a data governance, and I totally agree with you on that point. I had to review the SOPs and the flowcharts and the data diagrams that was drawn by the data architect to make sure it was meeting the policies and the procedures I have put early in that project. Okay. So yes, we did that. It's basically a piece of paper, or it could be like a whole user guide that has flowcharts in it explaining the process of the business, how it works. As well, we add the data diagrams of like the flow diagrams as well. And this is defined by the architect with the support of the master data governance to make sure it's validated.
Okay, yeah. Okay. And the architect, yes.
Yeah, and again, it depends on the business and the resources, you know, like I have applied a couple of projects. One project had this, and other just, okay, we draw the process and just let's go implement. So it depends on the size of the company mainly.
Okay, and to answer to Bill, where I work, it's the same. We only have one DBA. Maybe there are two, but they do all the different roles. They have all the different roles that are written here. We don't separate them.
Yeah, and in the Middle East, we have every department has its own.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would add that aspire to the formality that you have in your process for ingesting data. With a data governance program that's just getting off the ground, we don't have the policies, but I agree that data governance is responsible for making a policy that says when we're bringing data into our system, this is the process we should use. What we have done, because we are a small company, is some dude at 2 o'clock in the morning will load the data into the database. And we've had problems where data has been loaded into a production environment before they've gone live, but still it's in a production environment that resembles, what would go live. And when there are problems, it takes a long time to troubleshoot them. Whereas my approach would have been loaded into a staging so you can check it before you load it into a production environment, which would have been one of the steps in a formalized process.
And I just want to add one last point. In like one of the companies I was working with, Basically, as a data governance, I have worked all the type of jobs. I worked as a data governance and as a data architect, like I literally draws a process of the data flow. And at the same time, I had to collaborate with the database and developers to like put the data structures and catalogs on the system. So it just, again, it depends on the business itself and the size of the business.
I have a question about the CDMP exam itself. And forgive me if this is old hat to many of you, but this is the first time I've been on a call like this. I understand that this exam is open book and open note. In school, when an exam is open book or open note, or both especially, that's usually an indicator that the questions will be unusually challenging. It won't be enough to have just a good foundational knowledge of the subject in question. They'll be like almost deliberately misleading or tricky. Some of the sample questions that I've seen for the CDMP exam seem overly simplistic. It'll be, like, what is this definition? It'll be the definition of a database. It's like, yeah, I could have skimmed the chapter and understood that. Where did these exam questions seem to actually fall, those of you that have taken the exam?
Yeah, so I just want to jump in and correct really quickly. The exam is no longer open notes.
Okay.
It's open book, though. So I think around the end of last year, they changed it. So and you can only use one book. It's also worth noting. So you can use any book, but there's really no world in which you would want to use a book other than the data management body of knowledge. And then in terms of the relative simplicity versus complexity of the exam, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Like, I would say they try to not trick you, and they try to draw the questions from the DMBOK. There's a few that they will say are meant to be based on your industry knowledge and that you can't find in the book. Like when I took the exam, there were several that I was just like, I could have unlimited time to try to find the answer, but I just don't think it's here. And so for those ones, I just guessed. And then ideally you get a score of 80% plus. So I do think that that's very attainable for most people after having read the book.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I recently did the exam, like I think 2 months ago, month and a half. And the way I prepared this was just doing the practice questions from Nicole, and also what they provide when you purchase the exam, right? And you get an extra about 200 questions every time you do a run. And you get really quick in finding answers in your PDF, in my case. You just have to get good at using the core of 1 or 2 words that you can actually find in the book. And as soon as you got the place where the answer is, you can clearly see what they meant and how they rephrased the answer. Wow. So yeah, that was one of the things that was really helpful to get through it real quick.
You're the master of getting through it real quick. That's really good. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you get a PDF copy of the book, you can just use Control F. It is possible to do it with a hard copy. That's what I did. You did that,
right?
Yeah, that's what I did. And then I just looked up the questions at the end. But is that the most efficient way to take the test? I mean, clearly.
Well, the thing is, one of the problems with using the search function is that you can get like 300 hits. And that's pretty painful because you first have to filter on which chapter it is, but selecting the chapter in the PDF is like you're scrolling and scrolling. So you tend to lose time with that. So you need to really get good at finding the right spot.
Yeah. And for me, I just knew I would be a lot more focused studying if I studied with the hard copy. And at the end of the day, we all want to be better data strategists, right? So, we're learning this so that we can implement it as consultants or in our organization.
Or this is just tricks, right?
Or it's just, it's just for fun. And you just want to add as many certifications. And if that's your goal, then.
No, it's like, this is a trick to get the exam passed, right? But it's essentially, you're doing it for the knowledge, right? But it helps when you ace the exam.
It's better to understand your goals and then build your study process from there.
Yep.
So yeah, those are really great suggestions. Thanks. Great question.
About the cloud, I think it's a good point to say that since the tendency is to move more and more and more of the data to the cloud, are the DBA still a role that will be relevant in the near future? I'm thinking the person who are creating the application where the data are created, the editors, that would be responsible for the structure of the storage of the data and in the cloud. So how do you get your DBA to still be involved in the storage part of the data if the tool is not yours, it's the editor, and it's in the cloud? So it's probably an API, you access it with an API for between different applications.
Yeah, these are all really good questions. Unfortunately, the DMBOK is quite light on cloud knowledge. The second edition came out in 2017, and maybe this was before the adoption of the cloud was so widespread. I think the database architects would work closely with the cloud architects because they're slightly different roles. I still think that there will need to be both. I know that only answers part of your question, but frankly, I'm not incredibly knowledgeable in this area. I've only done the CDMP and then the very basic AWS Cloud Practitioner cert. But if you're curious, each one of the cloud providers does have a pretty entry-level certification. So you can kind of get some knowledge of this field, which I recommend.
We will have to, yes. Yep. And also I see that the API, it's considered as a kind of database and that the DBA should be responsible for the API. Do I understand that right too?
My understanding of what I read was that it was talking about the API as an abstraction level, and the abstraction levels it mentioned was ODBC. So if the application developers want to use that abstraction level, they would need to get the settings and the values from the DBA, which server it is, which port it is, what the login credentials are, because they wouldn't want a personal login, they would want to use a service login. So they would need to work together with the application developer to create that contract or that mapping.
Okay. So, it's ODBC, so it's connection to a database. Okay. And also, I was wondering, I have a feeling that today it's more the data engineer role that have the cap of database administrator, or am I maybe thinking project versus production? I have a feeling that at least in small companies that it would be the data engineer that will actually have the role of the database administrator. Choose which storage, choose which tool to store the data, install it, configure it, collect and move the data into it.
Yeah, that's a question that I have as well. At our organization, we have both data engineers and database administrators. We have 2 DBAs and we have 5 or 6 data engineers. And it seems that the database administrators are responsible for performance tuning and making sure the storage is set. And if it needs to be expanded, they're the ones that set the values within the database itself. And the data engineers are the ones that people come to when they need stored procedures run or access to things. So they're more like operational DBAs, I guess, is one way to look at them.
Okay, thanks.
At least in our organization.
So the frontier is very cloudy. Like it depends. Like it could be everything. Where you draw the line in between the roles, it's up to us. It's up to the organization. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments about this section?
Nicole, do you happen to have some kind of study guide for people? Just throwing it out there.
Yes.
Wow.
Thanks. Thanks for giving the tip off there, Hilko. So Data Strategy Professionals has a number of tools to help you get ready for the exam. One of them is a study guide. So this comes to you by email, which I think is great because we're knowledge workers. We all live in our emails. So it's good accountability to get those reminders to keep studying and progressing through the data management body of knowledge. If you prefer to study by looking at all the notes at one time, we also have a notes document, although I will say this is less useful now because you can't use it on the test. The test is just open book now, not open notes. And then I already talked about the practice questions a little bit that came up earlier. Thank you, Hilko. Yeah, you'll be excited to know I'm also working on a video course now.
So, really?
Yes, really.
Nice.
based on your suggestion, because it took me a while to be like, oh yeah, that would also be valuable.
Nice.
We also offer a membership, and this gets you all of the study materials plus the videos of guided study sessions, which is like the PowerPoint that I showed a minute ago. It's those videos and a free t-shirt. Okay, thanks for stopping by. See you next time.